And we bring in our next reader. First, Missouri Poet Laureate, Walter Bargen.
I'm turning my phone on so I can time myself. Well, I thought I was. Oh well. So much for that. I was going to read a couple of poems this evening, which some of you may have seen me read on the Paul Pepper Show on KMOS. These two poems are called Utterly Gone and Utterly Again. That is Utterly, a play on the word utter. The first poem I wrote 40 years ago, it was eventually published in 1979 in the South Dakota Review. And then the next poem is about a telephone call that I received about this poem about 20 years later, which seems really curious. And the reason why I read these poems is they seem to have developed a life of their own. They don't need me any longer. The setting for the first poem, Utterly Gone, is in a place called Oketa, Missouri, Okete. And that turns out to be about 60 miles northwest of St. Louis. And that Oketa actually means something about flies, and it's from the Yoruba language, which is mostly spoken in southwestern Africa. That should let us know just how multicultural we are, and we should remember that with all the craziness that's going on around us at the moment. Utterly Gone. In midsummer, on Forrest Gladney's farm near Oketa, Missouri, oaks are dense. The small pasture is barely visible through an occasional break in the leaves. Who would hike back this far over the rocky slopes, snakes, and poison ivy of these hills and leave with the right eye, the right ear, and the tongue, utter, gone, the sexual organs defiled? Is this what they think? The cuts through the hide are surgical. The blood has vanished. An unearthly smell has kept coyotes and vultures away from the carcass. Something is getting closer. The night aches with lights. Did the Angus tongue break the news that there are two of each of us, and the one they take is a stranger to us all? Okay, 20 years later, I get this phone call. You know, a poet is always desperate for an audience, even if it's an audience of one. And I spoke with this person for about a half an hour on the phone. A man calls from across the country. He's urgent as cumulus clouds crowded in a phone booth at Atlantic and Boardwalk. I hear him clearly speaking out of the grip of my hand, the rain of his syllables flooding my ear. He's calling me about the last two lines to a poem published 20 years ago in a small South Dakota literary magazine. I don't hear thunder or the drumming of a downpour, but he's persistent, urgent, 40 years old, working at an engineering firm that won't promote him until he completes a degree in anything. The poem describes cattle mutilation, the details that turn our heads away even as our eyes move farther down the page. There's the irony of someone, them, traveling light years, hundreds of millions of miles to surgically remove the right ear and eye, the tongue and udder, all the blood and the sexual organs from a grazing Angus, the highest life form in a tick-infested back 40. We talk for half an hour. He says each morning for a week he's repeated those last two lines, and the one they take is a stranger to us all. And the one they take is a stranger to us all. I mumble something about Descartes, consciousness, the mind-body duality of Western culture. I don't believe I've helped. He says it's just what he needed to finish his paper. I ask who is teaching the class and at what college. But he says he was asked not to reveal names. Later, after his generous thanks and promise to have a check in the mail for copies of all my dusty books, the check never arrives. I begin to wonder, to have doubts, who it was I spoke to, and maybe I shouldn't have given my address to a stranger. Isn't that what we warn children not to do? How could anyone have found that obscure issue of an obscure magazine, to have read a short esoteric poem and then assigned it for class discussion? Who was I really talking to? Maybe they think I know something, that these words are a code and a plot. In the room by the phone, it's growing dark. The ceiling begins to rain. Take me to your leader. It doesn't end there. A couple days after I read this on the Paul Pepper Show, I received an email from a woman who said that her daughter had worked as a sheriff's deputy in Montauk County in the mid-90s, and that she was called out to investigate an event similar to this, a cattle mutilation that so disturbed her. And by the way, she said my description of it was almost exactly how her daughter had described it. It has so disturbed her daughter that she still talks about it to this day. Okay. Then I receive like a full screen email telling me about this man's father who worked in eastern Colorado in the mid-70s, who was a soil conservationist developing soil profiles, and he had a big auger on the back of his pickup truck. And one day this rancher comes barreling down the gravel road, jumps out of his car, has a rifle aimed at his father, and his father said that it took him about 20 minutes to talk this guy down to finally get him to believe that he was actually doing soil profiles. And as it turned out, this man had lost a half dozen cattle to cattle mutilations. Where did that come from? Well, the next week in the county paper in eastern Colorado, there was nearly a full-page picture of his father with a headline, "Don't shoot this man." Okay, one more thing about these poems. Paul Pepper on something, I don't know, a blog or an email he sent out to his viewers, said that he had 4 questions that he wanted his viewers to think about in relation to the poem. Who was it on the phone? That's number 1. Number 2, how did this person on the phone find this obscure poem in an obscure magazine 20 years after the fact? 3, why was this person so obsessed with those last 2 lines? And the one they take is a stranger to us all. Lastly, and most important, when will the promised check arrive? Utterly, again, is in my latest book, Too Quick for the Living. And if anyone should want a copy at intermission, I have a few in a bag. But one last thing. Here is the cover to my book that's coming out at the end of September from Lamar University Press. This is called My Other Mother's Red Mercedes. It's about dementia, so not very funny. Anyway, thank you very much.